I'm Dr. Peter Hill, architectural and social historian and author. I do a lot of education lectures and things, higher universities, that kind of thing. Today I'm going to be talking about this church of St. John the Baptist here in Corby. A marvellous church with many mysteries, which I hope to unravel as we progress. Well, let's start with the original church as it was. There are still some pieces of it here in this more modern version. Okay, well, just to the left of the notice board there, you'll see a little square piece of masonry incised with a cross. It was quite common when a church was rebuilt or altered to keep a vestige of the original building. And that's one rare little piece of the original church just engraved there. There are two more pieces, which I'd never seen, which could be identical, in the spire. We are sitting here talking in the middle part of the church. This was the original part of the church. The bits on either side were much later. So can you imagine this as a Saxon church with a ceiling, a flat roof? You wouldn't see the roof at all. And also the door where you're sitting there was the tower, of course, which it is today. One of the most intriguing things about churches are the graffiti you often find inscribed in the walls. Here in the tower, we have TB 1751, either side of me. There's the same on this side. Now, it's a bit of a mystery if you don't know who TB is, but you can actually solve from this kind of graffiti who that person was in the parish registers. He was probably a church warden. It's certainly not a vandal like today, but church wardens would have obviously been so dedicated to the church during their life, they like to leave a little piece of themselves behind after they passed away. And this was one of the ways they could do it. So TB is definitely a person who you can look up if you go to the right place, the parish registers, either find out the birth or certainly the death of that person. That date is a good marker to who he or she was. You can see above the organ pipes the outline of the original Saxon church, which formed an apex. It was gable style, most Saxon churches were. You can see to the left of the pipes the outline going up diagonally towards the top of the roof. The right-hand side of the pipes hide the equivalent section coming down. What we've got here to the side of me is what's known as a consecration cross. It's usually a circular pattern with four arms. In this case, they're shaped like axe heads. It's called a globe cross. When a church was built and dedicated, the bishop would come down and 12 would be marked on the church in some form. Some would be painted, like at Kettering, usually in red, or they'd be cut into the stonework. This is the only one with another survivor by the porch, which is in worse condition. So it's a fine survivor of the original church when it was dedicated. Right, here in the chancel, above my head, is a corbel, which is coming out on as you look very carefully, you see it's a human face, well, semi-human, with two hollow eyes, and coming out of its mouth to the right and looping upwards is some foliage. It's a very poor example of a green man. And the green man is a fertility figure placed in churches to encourage growth, spiritual growth of the congregation, and also economic growth for a family and crops and that sort of thing. Why is such a pagan-looking figure in churches? Well, in the Bible, in the New Testament, Christ says, "I am the true vine." That became a kind of a clarion call, if you like, for masons and carvers and patrons to have an image of either a face composed of foliage, a face with mouth, nose or eye foliage, or a face surrounded by foliage. It became in later years known as a green man, and it's a popularly sought out figure in churches across Britain and Europe today. In 1205, that aisle to the left, the south aisle, was added by the new Lord of the Manor, Henry Braybrook. And he also added the font as well, which you see the round font, which we'll have a look at later on. We're now standing in the south arcade, which I mentioned earlier to Kath, was built in 1205. The other feature, which appeared in the church at the time, is this fantastic font. It's a Saxo-Norman font with a dog-tooth design. It's quite late, as I say 1205, because 10 years later, most fonts in churches became polygonal, many-sided, as you see in churches. So this is an early, very early font, lead-lined. Absolutely incredible condition, and it's great to see. Well, it looks almost as if it's been carved today, 1205. So a very late Saxo-Norman font. Then in 1274, another Lord of the Manor, Latimer, Sir William Latimer, he added a lot more. He extended this bit we're sitting in and also the chancel behind us. So he did quite a lot of extra things for the church, enlarging it to what we almost see today. Well, dating from the Latimer time, 1274 to 1305 roughly, this feature was added to the church. It's known as an Easter sepulcher. Quite elaborate and in stone. There aren't many left in stone across Britain, but this is such a fine example. It's worth pointing out a little bit about its purpose. Every Good Friday, right through to Easter Sunday, candles would be lit with tapers, and church wardens would have a rota system forming a vigil here over that period. They'd be supplied with ale and cakes, so no shortage of volunteers, while the crucifix was placed here with lights on either side to honour the death of Christ. It became a national feature. And I say they weren't always in stone. Quite often they were made of wood and wheeled out specially for the occasion. But this was such an important feature in the lives of the Latimer family that they had it installed in the church. So can you imagine in the medieval period, the crucifix here with lights either side and the church wardens keeping a vigil over the 48 hours. There was a transitional period between the Saxo-Norman and the early English, which is these pointed arches. And you see that they're not quite pointed on that side of the church. The next major part of the church's history was the 17th century, when there were 3 bells. 1673 is the earliest one, and they were actually recorded in 1700. But in 1722, 3 more bells were added. So the original ones were recast, and these 3 new ones were added by Henry Penn, who was a major bell founder at Peterborough. And he had one of the new bells inscribed with his name, and the other 2 bells were inscribed with the church wardens at the time. And then we're going to move on from there up to 1844, when the church was restored during the Victorian period. Just basically like most churches of the time. It wasn't mucked around with too much, fortunately. And then we're going to go on to 1900 to 103, 1900 to 1903, when a new vicar, a very ambitious man and a great scholar called T.G. Clark came. He'd married an heiress of the Cadbury chocolate factory. So he had a lot of money in the family, basically. So what it was, he decided he wanted to make some major changes. So he added another aisle this side, to the right of where I'm sitting. So now the church looked like a church most churches are today, with 2 aisles either side. And what he actually did on top of that, he had the roof replaced above us, a new oak roof. He had the west gallery, where the musicians would have been at one time, taken away, and a new organ installed as well. So lots of interesting things were going on. He also had the floor changed up by the chancel in a mosaic pattern, and a new pulpit. Quite a bit of things, quite a few things going on, in fact. The next change was 1931, when The mountings were added for the 6 bells in the tower. And then really nothing much. 1969, we could say that the north aisle at the back near the vestry was named as a chapel. There's a little altar over there, as you can see today. There are 2 other things I ought to mention. That when he was here, the T.G. Clark was here as the rector, he discovered a time capsule and put a new one in. And inside were coins, Edward I and his wife, photographs, and a copy of the church magazine as it was. Again, in 1999, that was uncovered, and 2 new ones were put in. I believe you may have been involved with that. So future generations can see what we live like today. But coming back to the church's name, we know it as St. John the Baptist. But until 1901, it was the Church of St. Peter. Many churches had their dedication changed for various reasons, economic, maybe they didn't like the original, the new Lord of the Manor. But in this case, the vicar had it changed because he had 2 other churches with the name of St. Peter, one at Dean and one at Stanyon. And so one of them he thought one had to have its name changed. So this being the major one, he had it changed to St. John the Baptist.